Hi, this is Liv Morgan, and you are listening to No One Knows, a deep dive podcast into the mysterious death of JoAnn Matouk Romain.
Hey, Liv.
Hey, Scott. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Your podcasts are really stirring up some shit.
You think?
That story with the truck getting hit by Billy's kid, it's just bizarre. And what I can't figure out is the media is not explaining why he ran into the truck.
It's so funny because when I've read things for the media, it's all legal, right? The legal team won't let them comment on what was on the billboard. But I'm like, I'm not doing anything illegal. Everything I'm doing is legal.
Yeah.
I haven't broken the law one time. Everything I reported is fact. There's documents.
Most of it is public record.
Right? So
from the lawsuit. So I don't know what the media seems to be afraid to say it, but all they have to say is the truck had audio and video pointing fingers at members of the Matouk family, including this guy's father, for being involved in her
Yeah. And I mean, you can attest to that. You were, your history of working in media and everything. It's crazy, right?
Yeah. It just, as a reader or a viewer, you're like, well, you're supposed to say who, what, when, where, why. Well, why? Why is this guy smashing into that truck on purpose?
Yeah. They couldn't link it back to my podcast. So I think the catchphrase for them was local billboard hit on podcast covering mysterious woman's death. There was no information to it, right? Which is part of the mystery in itself. But we'll take whatever we can get. It's leading more people to the podcast.
They're probably going to plead that case out, don't you think? They're not going to want it.
Oh, it's so they adjourned yesterday, and this is what's crazy is so I go to the court hearing yesterday. Billy shows up. He's got another gentleman that I recognize with him. Come to find out that guy is another low-level drug dealer as well, right? Mm-hmm. I've figured him out through the grapevine. I recognize the dude. I'm like, I know that's him, so I do some digging. Of course, that's him. So, but John Dakmack is the one that is representing Billy.
Who is?
John Dakmack. And so I start digging in this attorney. I'm like, who is this guy? And sure as shit, this guy sat on city council for Grosse Pointe Shores and worked at the Wayne County Prosecutor's office as an assistant prosecutor.
Oh, Jesus. So
I'm like, because I texted the kids and I'm like, I don't know what is going on, but the who Macomb County, the prosecutor, I can never remember his name. It's kind of a tongue twister, but that guy was kind of joking with Billy's attorney. And I'm like, this looks like they know each other. A lot of times people through the courts, especially if if it's people versus whoever, you come across a lot of attorneys, you get to know people within the courtroom. That's one thing, but this was odd. So I'm looking and I'm like, I got to do some digging. So I get home and I start looking. I'm like, that's weird, right? Tim probably found an attorney for Billy, and Bill Sr.'s probably just footing the bill, right?
Of course. The kid's a loser. So I think that probably the fix is in. They're just going to give him a slap on the wrist plea bargain. I mean, because he can't say he didn't do it. I mean, what defense does he have?
I don't know. And that's what's crazy is because they're saying, when it was listed in the article, it was stating that his lawyer said that they're going to plead not guilty and that they will present their defense in court. I'm like, what defense do you have?
I have none. What is low blood sugar? I mean, what are you going to claim?
I don't know. It's crazy. Multiple people saw him. Somebody got it on photo. I also heard through the grapevine that Grosse Pointe Woods went into the wine store after to try to get video footage, but it wasn't that day. It was weeks or months later. And Bill Sr. was like, you need a warrant. And then I guess they came back with a warrant for it, and it wasn't there. It was gone.
Jeez. crazy
But
stuff.
who else would have got the key to the van of the wine store? I mean, it's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Let them. I'm going to stay on them, though. And then I call the Macomb County Prosecutor the other day to try to figure out what time the court time was at, because it wasn't listed anywhere. Wasn't listed on the docket on the site for and it's at the 19th District Court, which is in Dearborn, which is in Wayne County. So it was like all confusing. And I call him, and his exact verbatim was, Grosse Pointe Woods dismiss themselves from this case because they have a close conflict of interest.
Okay.
So how does that work? What about JoAnn's case? Where was the close conflict there?
It's true.
I just was like baffled.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Pretty crazy. But yeah, just watch your back, because these people are crazy, and you really got to them, obviously, or you wouldn't be smashing into your billboard trucks.
Yeah, everyone says I need to start carrying.
Yeah, they always told me that when I was a reporter too, because I screwed with really powerful, dangerous people. Bobby Ferguson,
Yeah.
Kwame's guy. I'm sure that guy's murdered people. But anyway, being in the media gives you an element of protection. You don't usually see people in the media it brings too much heat. There was the guy out in Arizona years ago that was investigating the mob that killed him, and they started, I think it was called the Phoenix Project or something. They had journalists from all over the country went out there, started writing articles about the mob, and brought the mob down in Arizona.
See, I love that. And you know what? I've told everybody, when I started this a year ago, I said I can be a ghostwriter and nobody knows who I am, right?
Right.
Or I can put my face out there, I can put my name out there, and then that adds a level of protection, right? So I weighed the options, and I said, you know what? Fuck this. I'm not going to be a ghostwriter, and they're not going to intimidate me. I'm going to report what is here, where the evidence is pointing, and that's it. So thank you. I appreciate that, because I've had a lot of flack for doing this. So
I think you're all right, and it's a risk you take, but I don't think it's an unreasonable risk. I would just, watch your mirrors and stuff and make sure you're not being followed, that kind of stuff. Just normal.
Yeah. So I want to start here just because, so everybody, I know you and I have communicated before, but this is the first time you're coming on the pod. So
right.
I want to explain to everybody who you are, your history as a PI, your job. Just explain yourself. Come in and tell everybody, who you are. I mean, we've talked a lot about you on the podcast, and obviously your PI work and just your journalistic approach to things on how you handled JoAnn's case. But just to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of information on you. So I'll give you the baton here.
Okay. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm a private investigator. And before that, I was in radio and TV for like 38, 39 years. My last year was in TV as a full-time investigative reporter. In 2013, I didn't like the direction the media was going in. So I got my private investigator's license, and I've been doing that for, 10 years. Do a lot of work in the area of wrongful convictions. I've helped something like 10 people who were wrongfully convicted get out of prison. And then all the other kind of work that PIs do, except for domestic, cheating spouses. I don't like to get there. But I got into the Romain case shortly after I started my PI case in my PI company in 2013. I was contacted by Michelle, and we had a meeting, and I told her I'd look over the case, and if I thought it was a suicide, I'm out. If I don't think it's a suicide, I'm in, and I'll try to help you bring all this to light and try to get some media coverage and try to get something done about it. And when I went and read the files that she gave me, I couldn't believe that they ruled this a suicide. There's just no way was this a suicide. So I got in, and I've been working with them on and off for 10 years now.
I love that. And I love that that's everybody's approach, right? They're like, I'll look at the file. And if I look at it and it looks like a suicide, we're done. And if it doesn't look like a suicide, I'm in. And I don't think there's been anybody that's like turned their back and said, oh yeah, that's for sure suicide, aside from the people who were, compromised,
it,
right?
supposedly investigating.
So,
I mean, anybody else with average intelligence can look at the facts and say this doesn't make any sense at all.
mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, well, what really did happen? And what is astounding to me, after all these years, there's still never been a real investigation by law enforcement at any level
Mm-hmm.
To see, who murdered her and why. I can't understand why the feds haven't stepped in with all of this attention. I mean, it's out there all the time. It's been so widely covered. And I think one of the things I like about your podcast is people are sometimes on a case like this, they're hungry for every scrap of information they can get. So if you're writing a newspaper article or you're doing a TV story, there's only so much stuff you can fit into that bag, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're running, people can see the depositions, they can see the details that you couldn't ever put into a normal news story. But at a podcast, you have the ability to expand. So I think now that people have gotten more of the little details, the story is even more astounding than what they had read previously in the media.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I appreciate that. That was the whole thing that I when I had first reached out to them, I had said, I almost need more information. Like, I've watched The Unsolved, I've listened to every podcast, I've watched
Mm-hmm.
like Sploo Crime on, YouTube. I'm like, what am I missing? And it took a couple tries, but the kids were like, here you go, here's everything, look at it. And I was like, holy shit. I'm like, the whole world needs to see this.
Yes.
Because then
definitely.
nobody's going to believe anything that police or investigators or anything are saying is happening. So we're slowly just like peeling away at the onion, right? And just building up that energy for, I mean, there's still bombshells we have not released, right? So specific things regarding to Tim Matouk and his possible connection to other cases, other murders, other sexual assaults. We've communicated with other victims' families that are longtime crime, in the crime community, true crime, all of those things. They talk on all these podcasts, but we have to remember at the end of the day, they're families who are affected by this, that they've all been bulked in this group without their will or say. So there's been a lot of great people we've been able to meet, but through some unfortunate, circumstances. So there's a lot of things that we're still releasing. I mean, that, the case better than anybody. So so I have a few questions too. Like, what role did you play in the case at the time? Like, explain your theories, where the evidence is pointing in your brain from a PI standpoint and journalist and investigator and things like that.
Yeah, I used a little bit of my journalism training and my investigative training in the beginning, because when Michelle gave me all of her material, I came to the conclusion that you've got a great story here, but it's not sticking together. It's not tied together. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I did is wrote this story almost in chapters to explain what happened. Kind of almost like a newspaper story, right? So people would get, instead of getting a little bit of this and a little bit of that, tie it all together and tell a story. And then I told Michelle that I would try to get the state police to investigate it. I had connections in the Michigan State Police from my TV days. So Michelle and I had a meeting with this investigator, and she even recorded the entire meeting. And at the end of it, she said, this was no suicide. I want to reopen this investigation, and I'm going to have a couple of layers of management to go through to get the state police back into this. So then shortly after that, we had a news conference. We brought out the purse and some other things that hadn't been talked about much. And we told the media that the Michigan State Police, we had met with them. They were considering reopening the case. That day, the PR guy for the Michigan State Police told reporters, it was in the newspapers, that he had never met with the Romains, that the Michigan State Police had never met with us.
And this was in 2013, right?
2013, yes. And so he denied that they had even met with us. And then later, the investigator told us that she was overruled. Like a couple of bosses above her wouldn't let her reopen the investigation. And then it was just doing a lot of legwork for the federal lawsuit. We did surveillance at the liquor store. We did surveillance on some people, and just tried to get more and more evidence to try to force some action by either the state police or the feds. So that was a lot of my work with her. I was interviewing witnesses, that sort of thing. And then, every time something new would come up, I think you talked about the guy with the cell phone number that was on Tim's phone.
I told everybody that was your... Everyone always says, you found the... I'm like, no, I didn't find the Pepsi guy. Yeah. I'm like, Scott Lewis found the Pepsi guy.
That's an example. She had some running phone numbers that she got through subpoenas, right?
Yeah.
And so these three numbers come back to this guy, Ed Milam. Or this number does on 3-4 different databases, and that's unusual. Databases can be wrong. That's why they're usually a starting place. They're not a finishing place. But when you get three different ones that all bring this number back to this guy, it's very odd. So I found out that he was working, I think, as an assistant pastor or something at a church in central Michigan. So I drove up there with Romains and my wife, Nancy, on a Sunday. And they went in and started chatting with people, and they told them that this guy had been fired for some kind of an affair with an employee or a church member, something like that. He was let go. So then we got back on our databases and found a new address about an hour away from that church. So we went there and waited for about 2 or 3 hours, and he pulled up with his wife and his child. I think it was one young kid. And so I walked up to him and waited for his wife and child to leave, and then, approached him, asked him, about this phone number. And he denied ever having the number, anything like that. I was polite to the guy, I wasn't like pushing on him or anything.
Yeah,
like
I listened to your recording of it. Very polite.
So then the weirdest thing was when we get in the car, and he calls my phone and he says, "Do I have to be worried for the safety of my family?" I found that very odd, because all I had told him is that there is a civil lawsuit that I'm working on in Michigan, and one of the guys involved is Tim Matouk, and this phone number that comes back to you was called by his phone on the day that this incident happened. And I don't think I was any more specific than that. And I wondered, well, how did he get to the point where now he's asking me if his family is in danger? I didn't say anything about, that would lead him to believe he was in danger. So yeah, that was one of the assignments that I got from them. But it was fun work, and I'm glad I was able to contribute it. And I'm really glad that you're continuing to keep the ball rolling.
We're trying. I feel like we're making waves somewhere. I don't know how, but I feel like everything has led to this point, and I constantly come back to, like, the evidence that and the work that you guys have all done. Like, I obviously wouldn't be able to do this podcast without. I mean, you were so great the minute I called you right at the start. I'm like, hey, you're like the OG JoAnn Matouk Romain investigator. Like, do you have anything you can give me? Like, scratch notes, something, You're like, oh, I have a whole file. I'll Dropbox it to you right now. I'm like, cool.
There we go.
Those are things that you need to be able to kind of push forward in the case. And, I called Ed Milam. He's a huge question for me still. People ask, in my mind, he's 100% involved. I mean, the guy, I put him out on the podcast, and I cut it, about an hour and 25 minutes. Talked to me for over 2 hours. So for a guy that claims that he knows nothing, isn't involved with the Matouks or Tim Matouk, to talk to me for 2 hours, it's just odd.
Well, no, I didn't hear that on any of the podcasts. Did you record him?
Yeah, I did record him. Yep.
Oh, I got to see that one.
Yeah.
I don't know what episode. I got to hear that one. So what was his general thing? What was his
he just
point? Just like to me, he didn't know him. But
well, I called him and I said, your phone number is leading back in all these databases, and I actually So upon your digging, I did some further digging on him too, right? So I'm looking at things, social media, looking at the affair that he had, ex-wife. So I actually reached out to his ex-wife first. I sent her a message, instantly blocked me, right?
Wow.
So Kelly, I have Kelly, JoAnn's middle daughter. I have her reach out, send a message. She blocks. Oh no, I had Michelle. She had blocks Michelle. Then I had Kelly. She hasn't blocked Kelly. And normally we leave the kids out of it. His kids, his oldest daughter's older now. I think she's just a few years younger than I am. And we message her and we're getting blocked. And we're like, this is odd. For somebody who claims that they know nothing, all of these people, are so quick to block. If somebody messaged me and said, hey, your family member might be involved in something, can you give us a call? I'd be calling, and I don't know if that's just me, but I'd be like, what are you talking about? I don't want to be associated, but I can help you the best that I can.
Yeah, it almost sounds like they knew it was coming.
It was very weird. So I call him, and I just said that, I'm looking into the case of JoAnn Matouk Romain, and then he gets instantly pissed off. I told you guys I know nothing. They brought me down for a deposition. I know nothing. I said, listen, I'm not an idiot. Your phone number links. Your phone number also links back to your social security number, which to me, that means somebody stole your identity. And if you're not aware that somebody stole your identity and there's no other, credit cards opened or anything like that, the likeliness is slim to none. That's not my phone number. I don't care what your computer says, yada, yada. So then we start going and I'm like, listen, you're a pastor now. Like, are you sure? Like, you're not trying to be reborn again and redeem yourself. And it pissed him off. He hung up on me and then he called me back and he's like, we're talking and then he just he knew too much. To say that he didn't know anything, he knew too much. Like, he knew the fact that she had been dumped in the water and I had not mentioned that. He knew the condition of her body. I had not mentioned that.
Could he have, once we approached him, could he have gone and started reading about it in the media?
He could have, and that's the thing. That's where I'm like, okay, so you could have, totally. But where have we ever, aside from the podcast, where have we ever mentioned the condition of her body in depth?
Yeah, not in depth. I don't think in depth, but mention, basic details, but not in depth.
Yeah, no, I mean, he didn't mention he's talking about like her body still being in good condition to the point that like her nail polish was still on her fingers. Like it was just, and then where she was dropped. And I'm like, we never mentioned this to you. Mm-hmm. And you're claiming you haven't looked into it. You only came down for a deposition. And that was it. Mm-hmm. It sat so weird.
And it's pretty, the problem is when we brought him in for the deposition, I was there, and we had nothing to call him out on except the database reports. See what I'm saying? So once you say, well, why is your number there? I have no idea. We don't have any leverage to use to try to get more information out of him. So it was a very short deposition. I mean, once he said he had nothing to do with it, didn't know Tim Matouk, we've got nothing else.
Yeah.
We have nothing else to go with.
He did mention to me, because I was pulling a couple names and numbers off of the databases, and I had said, oh, what about this individual? And it was his ex-mother-in-law. And he goes, oh my God, don't call her. So I literally highlighted it yellow, like, call her. Like, come on, dude. But she never returned my call, so I don't know if she's now deceased or what. But that just makes me think that his ex-wife obviously knows something and is scared. Why be so quick to... So I leave that avenue open with him. I think he's a key in all of this, for sure. So, we'll see where that goes. But I want to talk about other suspects with you. You know, not suspects in the eyes of the law, because, they didn't have hardly any suspects, but your suspects that you have a chart on here within all the things that you have given me. The basic main people. So we've got David Romain, who is JoAnn Matouk Romain's ex-husband. Mm-hmm. We've got JoAnn Matouk, and then the two that were added by family, obviously the kids, the things that had happened before JoAnn's death. We've got Tim Matouk, Bill Matouk, but then we've got a couple other names. Do you kind of want to just reflect on how you looked into these individuals and how you came to decide who was probably more involved versus those who were not, bad business dealings, things like that?
Well, yeah, let's start with her ex-husband, soon-to-be ex-husband. I think she had just told him she was divorcing him. That certainly could be a motive, anger over divorce, and I think that he was dating one of her close friends.
Yes.
Yeah. But there was just not enough there. This thing was so elaborate. It didn't seem to me that this is the way someone, would take out their soon-to-be ex-wife. I mean, certainly he would, someone you had to look at, but it didn't look very likely. Bill Matouk, with all of the drama they had over the family fortune when the grandmother died,
Mm-hmm.
The lawsuits, he
Yep.
could have been probably criminally prosecuted. So there was a lot of bad blood between him and JoAnn over that, obviously. And then Tim Matouk, it was well known for many years that she was afraid of the guy. She didn't want her kids associating with him. In the days before she went missing, she told people she was afraid of Tim Matouk. And he acknowledged that he called her at some point before. Are you still able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay. He admitted that he called her prior to her disappearance, but he denied that he ever threatened her. So I think those two people definitely rise to the top.
Yeah.
And
Not saying
also,
that, David Romain didn't have, when you look at it from the outside like a fishbowl, right? That's a typical motive of a soon-to-be ex. But I think we need to remember the fact, too, is there was no evidence pointing towards him besides that. Besides circumstantial, right? There was no...
Exactly.
He was with the children. They had actually
Having
been
dinner.
separated
Yeah.
for 5 years. They were not legally divorced, but they were separated. JoAnn knew that he was having an affair during the end of their marriage with her friend. This had been going on for 5 to 7 years. There were these things that had already been happening, that there was really no change. There was no life insurance for JoAnn. There was no... there was no money he was going to get. People were talking about, oh, well, what about the mold case? He wasn't going to get any more money if she was dead. There was no motive for her to be killed by David Romain.
Yeah. And he's with his family having dinner when she disappears.
Exactly.
He's with the girls. So, yeah, he just didn't jump off the chart at me, but you got to keep an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you don't want to do is say, oh, it's got to be Bill Matouk, it's got to be Tim Matouk. You got to keep an open mind and look at everybody. The other thing to me that points to suspicion on Bill and Tim is the way the police handled this thing. I mean, it was insane that they declared it a suicide within 5 minutes. There were supposedly her footprints in the snow that were never there. They're knocking on Michelle's door at 9:35 saying her mother's car has been abandoned, and yet the car wasn't registered to her and they hadn't even run the plate yet.
Yeah.
So all those things, and there's many, many more things that the police did that are bizarre. Said the only fingerprints in the car were the family. Well, the family had never been fingerprinted. All these things make me a little suspicious because Tim Matouk is a former cop and he's still an investigator at the prosecutor's office. So there's obviously a lot of police connections there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bill Matouk, in his deposition, was bragging about how he knows all the cops and he's got the chief's number in his phone. And he comes in and I give him deals on wine and all that kind of stuff. So the fact that the police conduct was so bizarre, and these are two guys that seem to be tight with the police, I think also shifted more attention to them. And that's where they ended up going with a federal lawsuit focused on Bill and Tim. And who was the other name?
John. So
John. Yeah,
we
John.
haven't really...
Never
A lot of people have been asking questions on John, and I've been so not hesitant to comment on it, but there's a story within a story, right? And I tell everybody I can't get too far off of JoAnn's story into John's story, but John's story plays a factor in JoAnn's story. Mm-hmm. But there's so many names involved. So that's why I was like, I was going to ask you, like, explain how you dealt with the JoAnn Matouk approach, his business dealings, his role and his story, and how he's kind of became the name and the face of Bill and Tim stating that it was John's bad business dealings, and then all of a sudden it was suicide. You know, kind of just your mindset on all of that and your approach that you guys took during the investigation.
Yes, well, there certainly wouldn't be any motive for Joann Matouk to hurt his sister. I mean, they were very tight, and I think John obviously very distraught over this. But John created a lot of enemies in his companies, and I honestly don't know whether Tim Matouk was behind his problems. You know, he had a check problem in Wayne County, and he had some debts, and so there were plenty of people that didn't like Joann Matouk and probably knew that his sister meant everything in the world to him. Mm-hmm. So if you want to punish someone or you want to get their attention to pay you back some money or whatever, if you kill them, you don't get the money and you don't get the desired effect. So theoretically, someone could have done this to send a message to John. I still wouldn't totally rule that out. I mean, you know, he was involved with some strange characters. This Tony Pipia. Yeah. Have you talked about him in your podcast?
I have not, for the simple fact that I know he is mafia related.
So this Tony Pipia guy, there is a video. People can find it on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I'll link it in this podcast episode, actually.
Okay, yeah. So you'll see this. I guess he owed Pipia some money or something, and John is standing at a car wash, and Pipia just comes up from behind and levels him. And Pipia was, I think he spent a lot of time with Bill Matouk at the liquor store, and was also, I think, the Romain family, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so I had asked the kids about Tony Pipia, because Tony Pipia, John, Bill, Tim, they're kind of all in these connected, like, business. Obviously, Bill and John are brothers. John and Tim can't stand each other, so there's like this big feud, right? And I was actually asking the kids, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, I said, I know Tony Pipia. I know where all of this is, but, like, I don't understand. And Michael and Kelly and Michelle, they're all saying, well, it was odd because when our mom went missing, he's at our house. And they're like, that wasn't normal. We'd only met him a few times. Like, he was John's, you know, John had done business with him, but he was here during this time when our mom was missing. And the minute she was found, he's out of the picture. They see him at Bill's store, and it was almost like he was used as a middleman to get information. I know JoAnn's death is connected to drugs, sex trafficking, probably some mafia stuff. The mafia stuff concerns me for the simple fact that there's so many people connected. It's like you don't know where, right? And I feel like I'm trying to draw a web for people, and when you start getting into John's story and the mafia, and then it's this large web. At the end of the day, John had a good business, right? The business took a crash. He started putting so for instance, his home, he put his home in a gentleman's name. And the gentleman, I'm sure you're aware of this, he was a big business guy. And long story short, Tim and Bill threatened the gentleman that John put his home in. And this $500,000 house and all of its contents were sold to Bill Sr. for like $125,000. So they basically swindled this guy and got John's house. Like, it sounds like an honest to God movie, but that's why I chuckle, because I'm like, is this even for real? You know, they swindled all this from underneath him, threatened the gentleman. Tim used his badge. I mean, it came out in deposition. Tim basically used his badge to come in and scare the guy. And the guy had a very well-known business. I think it was in the oil industry. he basically told him he would screw him if he didn't do this. And that's kind of where the blood really continued to boil between John and Tim and
right.
Bill and all of that. So like you said, we can't totally, I 100% can tell you John did not have anything to do with JoAnn's death himself. No way.
No, I don't believe that either. I don't believe that for a second.
Nope.
But that whole family, everything is so tangled, and there's a lot of people with different motivations, and the fact that the police have, in my opinion, pretty much covered up a murder by not investigating it thoroughly, it tells me that there's got to be one hell of a big story below all this. There's something bigger going on than just them deciding that they wanted to take JoAnn out of the picture. There's something going on below the surface.
Yeah.
That's, I think, is something very big.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of what you think? You know, the more I look into things and the more I talk to people, and then I'm sure you saw, you know, the drug busts that have happened in Grosse Pointe Woods.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of speculative to say, but when JoAnn went to talk to Bill at the liquor store, when Michelle took her there, and she went in and talked to him a little bit, apparently trying to patch things up, and came out white as a ghost. Michelle, she wouldn't tell Michelle what happened, but Michelle thinks that she stumbled on something. Probably they had an office upstairs. Maybe she went upstairs and stumbled on something. Mm-hmm. But there's something going on. I just don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And we had tried to find out through surveillance. We did quite a bit of surveillance on the liquor store. We saw some odd things, but nothing that really jumped out at us. We did find out that they were selling liquor below state minimum, and they were selling wine cheaper than Costco, and they were also shipping liquor. We purchased liquor and shipped it to people and then documented it. So they ended up, the State Liquor Control Commissions found out about this. I don't know from the deposition or how they found out, but they went in and I think they shut down the liquor store for 30 days or something during the holiday season. So we know there was that kind of, I'd call it little stuff going on, but what the big stuff could be, I don't know. I just know that it's very odd that the police rushed to judgment on this case and then have refused, even with all the information that's come out from so many credible sources, have refused to reopen it and take a serious look at what happened. You know, why don't we have a federal grand jury on this?
Agreed. 100%. And people don't understand that when you guys are saying, yeah, we've gone to local law enforcement, we've gone to MSP, we've spoke to the FBI, you know, where else do you go? Mm-hmm. If it can't get past who it needs to get past and it's getting shut down at the top, what do you do?
Yeah, where else is there to go?
And this is sorry, go ahead.
What I keep hoping for, and it hasn't happened yet, is that somebody will come forward with the key to solving this thing. Mm-hmm. People know what happened.
Exactly.
And based on everything that's happened, including, Billy Matouk Jr. accused of smashing into your billboard truck, people are afraid. People can see there's something evil going on here. Mm-hmm. And so if just one person would come forward that had inside information, factual information, something that could be used as evidence, hard evidence. I mean, they were there or something like that.
Yeah.
Then this would have to the police would have to investigate it.
Yeah. And I think too, just with the generation that we're in now with everything, I almost wonder, and I come back to this, I think the public is going to be the game changer for this case. Mm-hmm. I think, the public in the Grosse Pointe Woods community, there's always been this clear divide. You either think she was murdered or you think she committed suicide. And usually, depending on that, depends on what side of the line you stand on, right? Who you know, who you talk to. There's been a lot of people that have come forward just since doing the podcast that have said, oh my God, I've shopped at the wine store. I didn't know all this extra evidence, right? Like I didn't know everything And they're like, I will never step foot in there again. Like, I didn't know that Bill Sr. refused to hang up a missing poster sign. And I'm like, yeah, that says a lot about who you are. Your actions, say a lot about the things that you do. And that was another question too. During your communications and your investigating with JoAnn's case, at what point or what time did you ever talk to Bill and Tim? How did that kind of play out?
Honestly, I never really talked to Bill and Tim. I did get a call the day after we held our news conference. I got a call from another investigator in the prosecutor's office that I've known for many years. And he said, he works with Tim Matouk. He said, you need to get off this case. You're going to embarrass yourself. This was a suicide. What are you thinking? That kind of stuff. But there was really no reason for me to interview Tim and Bill because that happened in the depositions.
Yeah.
We let that go to the lawyers. So I really never talked to them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so there's no way of really knowing other side. And
Have you tried to talk to him? I know that Tim made a short statement to Karen Drew when she did her investigative stories on Local 4. He just gave her a short statement. The other thing I find interesting is that the chief of police, Dan Jensen, who still insists this was a suicide, refused to be interviewed by Karen Drew. Well, if this is a suicide and this is all wild speculation, why won't you come on TV and tell us your reasoning behind that?
Mm-hmm. I agree. No, I have not. A lot of people, the minute they hear the name Liv Morgan, now they run in the opposite direction. So
I know that feeling.
I feel like I'm burning some bridges unintentionally and not in a, negligence way. Just people don't like the fact that I will continue to ask questions. So Grosse Pointe Woods, I have not heard back from. I can't get a hold of anybody there anymore. The best thing I can do is walk in there and ask to see somebody, and then they'll come up with some sort of lie and saying that they're not there. That's happened so many times. Bill Jr. said he'd gladly come on the podcast, so this is my plea. If Tim and Bill, or Bill Sr. or Bill Jr., if anybody wants to come on the podcast, come on. Speak your truth or what you think is your truth, and we'll go from there. But I think just I have not been able to. I mean, I've got a few comments, Richard Coretti, the sitting judge in Macomb County, sent a text to somebody like, that bitch Liv Morgan called me an alcoholic on her podcast. And I'm like, do you think the minute we connected you to all of this that nobody was going to come forward and tell us who you are? What? Like, I don't think that these people realize that people that they associate themselves with and that, see them out in public, they see the things that they do. And then they come back to the podcast and they comment on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I just had a girl the other day literally message me saying that she was at an event and Richard Coretti was there and he was like wasted the whole time and was just hitting on all these young girls. Like, it's, everybody has, regardless if you think you have enemy, everybody has somebody, right? Somebody that's not a fan, somebody that doesn't like them, or that watches from a bird's eye view and just, takes note, So I don't know where. We're just going to keep pushing forward. We're going to keep pushing with the media. We're going to keep on top of social media. I think that's going to be a real game changer. I always tell everybody, obviously, JoAnn's case, I don't know if you're familiar with the Menendez brother case.
Yes, I am.
But
for resentencing, yeah.
Yeah, for like how powerful social media and the public can be when it comes to old cases, right? So,
well, I think that's the difference too between what you're doing now and what was done prior by me, other investigators, and the media, is you're really effectively using the social media. And I don't have all those skills. I admire that you have those skills, but you're right, it does have way, way, way more impact. And, people seem to be getting away from this thing where you sit down at 5 o'clock and watch the news, or you sit down at 11 o'clock and watch the news. They want their news when they want it and how they want it.
Agreed.
And so, the podcasts and those sort of things change the whole landscape of the media, really.
And I think we need to, I always remind everybody, this case is 14 years old, right? So everybody will say, well, what about a Ring camera? I'm like, this is 14 years ago. This was like when you could like still get dial up at your house. Like this is, we're not talking, you know. So I always tell everybody, like every person who's been involved in this case at that time did everything to the maximum of their capability to what was allowed, right? You know, you guys were recording conversations. That wasn't really a thing. You know, that was something that, you know, had just kind of, now it's transformed into this podcast and all of these things. But I always tell everybody I would not be able to do any of this without, obviously, the stepping stones and the platform and the house you guys built. Now I'm just kind of putting the shingles on top, right? So.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more than shingles. I think you're understating it. But no, you have a good point. I mean, all this material was there mostly from other investigations and the depositions and the federal lawsuit. It's just, as I was saying before, the media has time limitations that you don't.
Agreed.
And people, when you have a story as crazy as this one, they want every scrap they can get. And sometimes I think they get frustrated by the mainstream media because it just scratches the surface. So this is a great use of social media for sure.
Yeah, and I think it, you know, when we talk about, like, we'll kind of wrap this up, but back to the beginning where you were saying, you know, the media is not commenting on your podcast. And I'm like, I don't owe an explanation to anybody, right? So like my podcast is my podcast. I don't have sponsors. I don't get paid to do this. This is all a passion project. I don't owe anything to anybody besides JoAnn's children, right? So all of these news stations, they have sponsors, they have people that they have to report to, and there's connections, and there's a lot of things. Whereas like here, I can be right, raw, cutthroat, to the point. I don't have to sugarcoat it. And that was a big thing for me was, yeah, I could approach it from a news standpoint, but then I'm like, is that really who I am? Is this how I want the story to be told? I want people to see the true authentic of us investigating, you know, late nights, early mornings, all of these things. You know, I just put a thing out because we want to do merch, and I had asked everybody, like, what slogan do you hear me say all the time that you want me to put on a shirt? And they literally, everybody responded with, what the fuck is going on? Like, because I say it all the time. Like, it's just, and the more I look into the case and I come back to things and I'm like, oh my God, not that I miss it, but I forgot that happened, or, you know. So I'm very thankful for you and all your investigating that you've done. I know the Romain children obviously talk so high of you, but you are like a true gem in the PI investigative world. So I appreciate you handing over all of your case files to my newly podcast self.
You're welcome. I was glad to have the call. I was thinking, who's going to carry the torch now? Because, you know, it's getting to the point where there's very few things left for me to do until you shake those bushes hard enough and something falls out. Then maybe I'll get back in the game.
Yeah, I would love for it. Anytime you want to come help. I'm a bulldog, so whatever you want to come on over.
Sure, and call me if you need anything.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate it. And we'll chat soon.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.